Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Laura Lear. I am the Deputy MD here at Ambitious. I've got over 20 years experience working with businesses and brands in the UK and internationally. And I'm joined today by three of my colleagues at Ambitious, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi guys, great to have you here today. I'm Joe, I'm strategy lead at Ambitious, and I also head up our digital and insights offer with a particular focus on SEO and online reputation management.
Hi everyone, I'm Maria. I am content director here at Ambitious and I oversee all of our kind of creative and content services across the agency.
Hi everyone, I'm Dani. I'm the Director of Campaigns and Community at Ambitious, and I tend to lead on kind of strategy and brand development and with that kind of messaging as well.
Great. So we're going to dive straight in. And obviously today is all about brand and helping equip you with some of those tools that can support you when it comes to brand strategy. And we know it's a crucial component of your business when you're building your business and you're scaling. And we know that your brand is key when it comes to, for example, investor confidence, attracting talent, increasing customer trust, and your overall growth. But it's even more complex today. We are exposed to as many as, I think it's 4,000 to 10,000 ads a day, which is actually equivalent of watching 16 movies, which sound crazy, or spending 7 hours online. So getting cut through as a business in this very much information-led world can be really challenging. And brand plays a crucial role in setting you apart from the competition. But when we talk about brand, it isn't just the branding, the visual image, the look, or how your business comes across. It's the personality, it's the purpose, it's your messaging, it's your customer experience and the culture, and so much more. It really does stick across every component of your business. As well as the increased adoption of digital media, we now have AI contend with, which is obviously adding huge additional complexities and having a real impact on marketing strategies and brand communication. So where do we start when it comes to brand building? I'm going to hand over to Dani just to kick us off there. Where do you start when you're looking at building your brand?
I think firstly, as Laura said, it's imperative we don't just look at brand as a visual logo or for that matter, a snappy tagline or an elevator pitch alone. It's this kind of creating consistency across all touch points. Your brand ultimately is your company's identity. It's its values, its missions, its vision. It's what your company stands for and why it matters. So when it starts and comes to kind of building that brand process, we've got to start with a purpose. It's why do you exist in the first place? And what distinguishes you from any other organizations out there. Then from then you can start to develop and look into your audiences, competitors, to do a clear analysis, to really learn your USPs and test them, back them up. And obviously your values, your mission, as we said, that all frames part of that to start creating that brand identity and personality that you touched on earlier.
I know you talked about, Dani, I know you run quite a lot of sessions and it comes to sort of, you look at the messaging and the right messaging to the right audiences. How do you go about doing that with your clients in that sort of framework of a workshop?
So first of all, I think we do a lot of looking for from workshop and a lot of prep for it as well. It's amazing how much people don't already know about the brands that exist when they're starting out on that process. A lot of it, we start with the competitor analysis, because actually that's where we get a lot of key insights in terms of what others are saying about themselves, where they're really proving they are unique within their selling points, and therefore how we can kind of match your organization and that brand identity to ensure you're having that cut through, even if it's to the same audiences that your competitors are anyway. We talk a lot as well when we're doing the messaging work about proof points. I think it's too easy nowadays to use the same old, we're award winning, we're authentic, and say, you know, we're open and honest, and all the USPs and kind of taglines that you hear all the time. And what we want to do is really sure that if you're saying that, you've got the things in place to back it up. And then from there, we can kind of start to build out the kind of characteristics, qualities, the traits, tone of voice, choice of language we use within the messaging, to truly work out what's going to unify that brand and allow it to kind of reverberate across the organization and any communication output.
Lovely. And just moving on to kind of the brand reputational piece, and we know that's absolutely crucial. You've got your brand, you need to protect it, you need to think about its reputation. And we do a lot of work, and I know, Joe, you lead on a lot of this work for us in terms of reputation audits. Can you talk a bit about how you approach those audits, why they're so important, online and offline?
Yeah, so reputation audits for us are really the foundation before we kind of go into any kind of proactive activation. Ultimately, our job as consultants to our clients, true consultants to our clients, is to take that outside in approach and really take a critical eye to how your brand is being presented offline, but predominantly online now in today's world. Perception from a customer or a key stakeholder is make or break within the first, 5 or 10 seconds of potentially when they Google your company, and putting your best foot forward from a digital perspective is key. So what we do is this kind of foundational piece is, we act as one of your key stakeholders, and we audit your communications across tap channels, taking a really critical eye to how you as a brand would be perceived by your customers. So we're looking across your media presence, your social media, your website comms, your leadership as well, what their leadership comms is like, what positions you're taking from a thought leadership perspective, and really just what the brand perception is out there for a multitude of different stakeholder points of view. We have a really comprehensive tech stack that enables us to do this, looking across kind of social listening tools and SEO tools, also utilizing AI ourselves to use the technology to really give us a really good impression of how your brand's being perceived. And chiefly, we're looking out for a couple of things. We're looking at where you're really excelling, where you're getting cut through, and where we can bear down more in future communications with proactive activity. But also critically, we're looking at any negative perceptions out there, any potential risks to reputation in the future, prevailing narratives on Reddit, for example, that, 1 minute are just in a forum somewhere and the next minute they're playing out, in national media. We've got the experience and expertise to be able to drill into where those key risks are. And then from there, once we've got that really strong information base and we've completed the audit, we have a really clear roadmap to how we're going to create campaigns that are going to potentially mitigate the risk, and really just elevate brand perception, brand presence, all of the important things to kind of take our clients' comms to the next level. But it's very much reputation audit is a starting point for us in the kind of journey as we go on from a brand perspective.
Thank you. And how has AI had an impact on how you approach then that next step of building a brand strategy and a digital program to support that brand reputation moving forward, Joe?
And it's so interesting. It's kind of threefold, I guess. Firstly, from our perspective as PR consultants and communications consultants, we use AI day to day. As I mentioned, I can now ask AI about what's the brand perception of Coca-Cola, and it would give me a 200-page report if I wanted to, but we use AI in our own insights gathering. So it's a helpful tool for us. From a tactical perspective for brands, using AI, strategically, potentially from some forms of content creation, checking your content creation, using it as a tool, basically, to help improve your brand presence. But really where I think it's super, super interesting and the best utilization of it that I've seen other agencies do, that we're starting to do ourselves for clients, is basically teaching the AI what your personas are as a brand. So say if you're a brand and you're looking to target 3 different types of personas, they could be very different. One could be a CEO, one could be a customer in your target audience. But we now have the ability to train the AI to act as that persona, act as that potential stakeholder. So it's learning more and more how we want it to view things. So once we've created these different persona groups, say the CEO who takes a really critical eye and is super numbers driven, and has certain demographic, personality traits that we can teach it, we can then feed it brand messaging from the workshop that Dani delivers, for example, and the results of that. We can feed it proposal decks, for example, from a B2B perspective, and ask the stakeholder or the persona that we built using AI to assess it using that lens that we've taught it to. So that's super interesting. We can basically in real time test our proposition against what is, learned behaviors, but technology that's advancing so quickly, it's only getting better. It's just really interesting, quite futuristic seeming kind of applications, but something that can be really powerful, only become more powerful from a brand strategy perspective as we go forward.
it's really allowing us to become even more accurate when it comes to our publishing and messaging and thinking about those brand strategies.
100%.
So I'm just going to move on slightly now from the kind of the foundation piece and the building the brand, thinking about that strategy and the word content, because we hear it thrown around in so many different ways. And I think it's been a buzzword for so long. And as I say, people do talk about it in different parts of their marketing comms strategy. So why is it so important to get this right, Maria, in terms of building your brand?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the word content is used all the time, overused potentially, and does, mean many things to many different people. I think for the most part, we're talking about, kind of reports and blogs and static imagery and animations. But I think really it's shorthand for video these days. I think a lot of the time when people are talking about content, they're imagining and thinking about video and films. And I think it's absolutely essential that people are considering kind of content strategy as part and parcel of your comm strategy. I don't think it is something that can be bolted on later, considering the world in which we now live. I mean, you've talked, Laura, about the amount of ads that people are served, the amount of information that people are seeing every day. I think with the advancements in AI and tech and everything you've just talked about, Joe, I don't think brands can kind of rest on their laurels when it comes to content, because that is what's driving people's online behavior and everything they're engaging and interacting with. So I think, it's really important to have that cut through, and that's really important for brands thinking about reaching their audiences and where they are with the content they're engaging. You need to make sure that, your content strategy is considered and from the outset, I think, so it's not something as an afterthought. If you've done all this brilliant foundation work that Dani's talked about, and you know who you are as a company and a brand and your purpose and mission and your values and all of this brilliant work, you want to make sure that it's then getting out there into the world. It doesn't become just an internal kind of activity that you've done and then no one knows about it or hears about it. And I think obviously communications generally can do that and get your message out into the world, but content absolutely needs to sit at the heart of that as well, thinking about how you can bring it to life through video, through imagery, through the stories that you're telling. And also, you're not going to be successful from a search perspective, but also on social platforms if you're not kind of content first. You've got to work with the algorithms. You've got to think about what's being prioritized, and it really is video first and foremost. So it's essential, really.
And presumably that kind of film as well, as opposed to the kind of more static written content, brings that human element to the forefront as well, which is obviously crucial to any comm strategy. Can you talk a bit about just that film, the power of that in a film and in a visual representation of your messaging, and why that's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an amazing way to bring to life a story. What's better than having a real live person on camera talking about their experiences or telling their story? And it doesn't always have to be a person talking to camera. You can be very creative and bring to life your brand story or your product messaging or whatever it is that you're trying to kind of express and tell people in lots of different creative ways. But there's lots of information out there, and it's very well accepted that people engage much better with video. They're much more likely to kind of interact and want to take an action afterwards. So from a brand perspective and business perspective, it's kind of in people's interest to lead with video and think about this format. And also as well that, it's highly shareable. So people want to share with their friends. We live in, a social media world. Everything is about kind of scrolling and videos and, sharing reels and Instagram. And, that is the world in which we live. And brands need to make sure that they're kind of tapping into that and staying at the forefront of that.
Brilliant. And where do you start then? If there are people listening to this webinar want to know, okay, we know we need a content plan, how do we do this? Where do we start in terms of creating that really effective content plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as with any strategy, you've got to start with insights. I think understanding where your audiences are, the demographics, what channels they're using, obviously that's really important for a content strategy. You don't want to create something for one channel and then presume it's going to work on another, because it likely won't. And you also need to understand what sort of content your audiences are engaging with, what is it they want to see. And, we always talk about kind of meeting people where they are and showing them what they want to see. And we're, brands and from our perspective as an agency, we're here to kind of answer a need of people and kind of be that problem solving aspect. So I think it all starts with insights, gathering all of that, and then thinking about how you can drill that down into maybe some content pillars, because it can be a bit overwhelming if you're thinking, well, I need to ideally do a brand film, and then we need to do some product films, and then we need to tell another story here, we need some case studies, and you can get overwhelmed with the scale of it. So I think it's about being really clear about who you need to reach and where, and then kind of work streams that you can think about potentially throughout the year. And it's very important to have a kind of always on approach, I think, to content generally, and in particular video, and just be really clear about what you're prioritizing first, and how it all fits within that pillar structure.
And presumably it's got to be quality content as well, because there's so much white noise out there and so much content, and we'll come on to that in a moment, like the good and bad content, that it needs to be trustworthy, credible content of a quality nature. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, less is more, I guess, although not always. If you think about channels, for example, like TikTok, obviously going through some issues at the moment, but that is a low-fi, high turnover, quick kind of short video content that people are going to scroll through quickly, and that's very different in nature to a kind of high production brand film you might spend a lot of money and time producing. They serve different needs, and they also are serving different audiences and speaking in a different way to people. So that's where it all comes back to that kind of strategy piece and thinking about your channel plan, your content plan, and who needs to see what and where. But as a rule, yes, quality over quantity for the most part.
And Joe, do you think you could just kind of add on there a little bit about how that links back to the kind of the trust signals and your online audit and reputation and your positioning online, and how, when you're looking at, you're auditing and you're looking at good content, bad content, why is it so important that it's credible and trustworthy?
I mean, for multiple reasons. Recent algorithm updates from Google over the past year with EEAT guidelines, dictate that you need to have trustworthy content, you need to show your experience, you need to show your expertise, and video can play a part in kind of filling that gap. Also, from our perspective, when we're taking a critical view, which we are, we know people make pretty snap decisions about what they think about brands. Those snap decisions can come from the first page of Google or the first video they watch about your brand, and it can turn them on and off when it comes to a purchasing decision. Even from a B2B perspective as well, it's a service-based product. I think ultimately when you're considering that with your video content, you need to invest really in quality. As Maria says, quality over quantity can be preferred, because ultimately people are making those snap decisions. And also we're seeing, just by way of proxy of Google owning YouTube, for example, YouTube videos are being prioritized by the algorithm. They're appearing in AI overview prominently, and YouTube's getting rich snippets more and more regularly when people are searching content. Basically, all of that to say is if you're producing really high quality video and it's going on YouTube and you have a YouTube strategy, that's going to appear really high when people are searching your brand. So really, it's an opportunity as well as a threat. Ultimately, it gives you the opportunity to really put your best foot forward, and utilize something that is going to rank and appear well. But I guess on the flip side of that, the other side of the coin is it's a threat as well. If you're just kind of doing the bare minimum from a video perspective, it's almost not worth it. You are going to be critiqued on that. So it's worth investing in putting your best foot forward then.
Thank you. And then just finally, Maria, can you just talk to the kind of what makes good and bad content? I know you're doing a lot of work creating great films and looking at the different sorts of films. Kind of, have you seen some really bad examples of content? What do you think makes that content great?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name and shame. I think really it comes down to, and going back to that kind of insights piece, but it's about developing the right content that answers a need for your audience, so it's going to be really valuable to them, but also channel specific. If you're creating something for LinkedIn and then you think you can just roll it out on TikTok, it's not going to perform as well. People aren't going to engage with it. You need to be channel specific and think about the differences that they have as platforms and the differences of the people that are kind of engaging and watching that content. Again, it's that that demographics piece, what age, what are they interested in, kind of what's leading in front on that platform. So I think that's the key outtake. If you take all of that on board and you really think about it, and I don't think you also need to invest lots and lots of money. You can be really creative and produce really great content that answers a need without spending lots and lots of money. It's just about really thinking it through. And I think, being valuable, answering a need of someone's, and I think that's how you'll see success.
Thank you. So we know that we need to create a really clear mark-on plan, brand communication plan to get that cut through. What's the impact of not having this plan in place to support your brand communications? And in today's busy world of information, Joe, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that question.
Yeah, channel saturation can be stressful. There are so many different opportunities now through different channels to get our message across. Me going through this stuff every day, I'm still finding out about new social media channels, which are meant to be the next big thing, especially with all the complications recently with Meta and X and different considerations. But from a Marcom's perspective, having that channel saturation and all of this kind of opportunity, you need to have tailored strategies basically for each channel. And without having that clear plan and perspective early on and, really thinking out where you're going to be most effective and how you're going to tailor, it's going to be difficult to be effective across those different channels. Also, from a more overarching perspective, if you don't have that clear Marcom's plan and strategy in place, you're going to lose your message as you try and adapt to your different audiences and adapt your strategy for different channels. So holding the whole thing together and basing that on insights and data and, customer workshops or whatever else you're going to have as an input into that Marcom strategy is really important. So you stay on message and ultimately you stay on brand and you don't lose it after having put all of that great work into, perfecting it and getting, really clear on the types of message you want to get across. So it's twofold in that way.
Great. And I'm just really on sort of prices and issues. I know, we obviously do a lot of work as an agency, working with our clients, support to guide them through major crises to their businesses and issues that they're facing. Dani, why is it so important to manage your brands when it's faced with a crisis or major issue that is going to potentially have that reputational damage and impact?
Yeah, sure. I think we've said a lot. We're in this kind of digital world where it's always on. And I think, not just with crisis and issues, everything we put out there can kind of have a life of its own nowadays. It's really important once you've got that strategy in place to stay in that driving seat. If you're not actively monitoring what's going on, it's almost like sitting in a driverless car, isn't it, without setting the destination. It might feel like you can naturally do that, but actually, before you know it, it's going off course, whether that is through an issue or whether that's just because actually someone new has joined the business and they've taken the brand strategy in another direction, and that's diluting the effort and all that work that you put in at the beginning. If you've spent so much time investing in developing that strategy correctly, then absolutely oversight is key to ensure that you protect it and keep that on course and not dilute it through any damaging messaging that could appear within this wild sphere that we now operate in. I think really how to manage that almost to me fits into kind of three key streams. Obviously, once you've gone through the process, then how are you documenting that? Like what guidelines, messaging frameworks, playbooks, templates to help manage that brand reputation. So it doesn't matter who is crafting the narrative or the messaging, it's always reflecting your brand accurately. And then, as he said, issues and crisis is the one thing no one ever wants to happen. It's probably the one thing that is relatively rare in most cases. But at some point, it inevitably will in some guise. So that risk then is almost instantaneous. It can take months and years to recover from something like that, depending on how bad it is. So having that crisis comms plan in place, a lot of people have the kind of risk management plans for their business, and they're very thorough and they're great. But if you don't then tie that up with how a situation is managed from a communications point of view, there's almost no point in having that risk there, because no one's going to know that you're managing it well, apart from the people that are dealing with it right there in that instant. And it's that reputational damage that can soon curtail everything. And I think thirdly, the other area that sometimes maybe we overlook is we're so concentrated on customers and clients as our core audiences, we forget that actually the people sat next to us in our office are just, or if not more important than that. And they're truly living and representing your brand on a daily basis. So having that connection with your brand and your employer brand is the only way that you're going to be able to truly breathe life into it and protect it across all of those spheres.
And that's obviously crucial as well for like attracting great talent, isn't it? So they can see and understand your brand and sort of get a feel for your sort of focus and your purpose and your values before they even potentially join your organization.
Yeah, it's costly, isn't it, to hire, right? And if you're going to put in all of that time and that fee, if you're using recruitment and all the rest of it, then you want to make sure that's right for you and for them. And once they're in, you want to retain them. So if you're not naturally reflecting that within your employer brand and your wider brand strategy, then nobody's going to win really long term.
And one of the things we often get asked is the kind of the sort of the importance of the business brand alongside the brand of a founder of a business who has huge credibility and knowledge as well, and how you combine the two, or where do you focus the most? I just wondered, Joe, is that something you can talk to? It'd be really good to get your views. And I know we've worked with a few organizations and had these questions before, but I've loved to, the balance between the brand of a business versus the brand of an individual behind the business. What do you need to consider?
I mean, it can be just as important as the other. Certainly from a reputation audit perspective, we always consider the kind of leadership profile. There's been many instances where crises are kind of driven and caused by the leadership and the messaging that they're putting out there. I mean, there's extreme cases when you're thinking about Elon Musk. You can't think of any of his businesses without thinking of him. And it just kind of shows the intrinsic link between those two things. So obviously leadership's own personal platforms, their personal brand, their own social media channels can be incredibly powerful if used in the correct way. If you think of them as a figurehead, they are the best person ultimately to deliver that messaging, from a EVP, employer brand perspective, looking to generate, new hires. But, from a sales perspective as well, it can be a really powerful tool. But on the converse of that, I mean, there's definitely risk from a reputation perspective as well. So ensuring everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, leadership, brand, marketing team across the board is really, really essential, and something that we put a lot of emphasis on when developing brand campaigns for our clients.
Thank you. And what happens, Dani, if the business changes, pivot, has a new focus, and they're looking at their brand? I think there's often a lot of nervousness about moving away from a brand or feeling like they have to start from scratch. And often it is, you can make tweaks, but how, if the business comes to you and asks you that, how do you manage that? What sort of things are you considering?
I think firstly, no brand strategy is forever, right? The world around us is constantly evolving, social business as it grows. So the brand has to evolve if it's going to truly represent you at any given moment in time. So absolutely never stop at the first iteration. I think the key is to know when that change is necessary. And obviously, as you said, you might have a pivot in the business. You might bring on new service offers, products change, develop. Sometimes you take your audiences with you, and as they grow and mature, they change too. So it's almost identifying that shift point. And then it does really mean going back to phase one to a certain degree. That doesn't necessarily mean you're starting from scratch, and it doesn't mean you need a full rebrand, but you are going back to those basics of what's the purpose, what are your values now, what is your mission now, and review and renew that process. And whether that is just an adaptation or whether that ends up being a complete rename, that kind of naturally come out of that process if you're doing it properly.
Joe?
I think I'd just add to that. I think there's a really great example of where a brand kind of waited too long recently, and it was all over LinkedIn, but it was the Jaguar rebrand. I think because they'd waited, 70, 80 years before doing anything with that brand piece, for them to leap sort of 20 years ahead into the future, I objectively don't think the look and feel was too bad, but it's that sort of stark change and taking so long to kind of adapt, which ultimately got them quite a lot of negative feedback in the end and kind of troubled that whole relaunch process.
Brilliant. Thank you to my fellow panelists here. And we're going to move on now to some questions actually from all the audience. So the first question we've had through is, what do you think of Google's AI overview and how it will impact brands in 2025? Does anyone want to start there? Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. We talking about in the office earlier. It's something that we talk about. We've been talking about with clients a whole lot over the past couple of months, and it's a subject of a lot of conversation in the office as well, because, you know, it is a big change from a search perspective. For the past couple of years, Google has been taking back control of a lot more of their own real estate on the first page, i.e. it's been deciding what it wants to show you through different types of rich snippets. This is the kind of pinnacle of this, right? You know, now when you search, Google, or AI in this instance, Gemini, is telling you what you want to see. And I think from a very basic perspective, it can be an amazingly useful tool. You know, we're all using it on our phones all the time. If you want answer to a quick question, AI will now give it to you. But really, brands now have to look from a search perspective of what their strategy is, because now it's, you know, traffic is down across websites across the board. And that's because people aren't actually clicking as much anymore. They're just reading the AI overview. So we need to have a really conscious and considered effort about how we are going to appear as brands in that overview. So it's about adjusting strategy to meet that. And things like I said earlier, you know, actually platforms like YouTube and Reddit as well are really being heroed by the algorithm and heroed by the AI overview. So, you know, it's a whole strategic consideration and it takes a lot of thought, but it's definitely something to keep front of mind with brand strategy, especially on search as we go forward.
Brilliant. Please do ask questions or send them in. We've got 15 minutes here and we've got a few coming in that please do share any questions with us. Maria.
I was just going to add to that, obviously, Joe, talking about YouTube being pulled through and being kind of prioritized there. And obviously, we've talked a lot about video. It's a video platform, you know, and if that's being prioritized and you want to be seen, you want your brand to be seen, then you need to be creating video content and that's valuable and people want to see. So it's just another reason why you've got to be investing in video, I think.
Brilliant. And next question here we've had in is, which specific AI tools do you use for social listening? Joe, do you want to take that one?
So I actually don't use an AI tool for social listening specifically. So we use Meltwater, for example, for our social listening. However, I would say my favorite or my personal AI tool of use for kind of general insights work is Perplexity. It has a lot more recent memory than ChatGPT, and it's really effective in kind of driving those insights.
Okay, thank you. Next question in here, Dani. Actually, sorry, no, I'll send this one to Maria, actually. How does content play into a strong employer brand strategy? You may both have views on this. And what types of content would you be considering if you're thinking about your employer brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think employer brand definitely is really key. I think when you're thinking about that content strategy and your brand strategy overall and your comms, it's as Dani's talked about, it's really important and powerful. And from a content perspective, I think, you know, telling the stories of your staff and your employees, heroing them and showing the amazing work that they do, the brilliant people that they are, and kind of really telling that human story is really powerful. You know, lots of brands do it and it can be very engaging. It's fantastic for attracting talent, but also just to further tell the story of the brand. You know, you want people to like you and feel like you're personable and you have a clear purpose and mission, and your employees are going to be the best people to tell that story. Again, I'm going to say video, but I think also kind of written testimonials, you know, showing your employees visually, having their images across things is really key and important.
I think I'll add to that as well, is don't forget when it comes to employer brand, of all the different touch points, you're literally talking everything from the job description that they first click on to the onboarding pack that they get when they join. So how can content play a part in breathing new life into all of that and pulling that back to strategy?
Brilliant. Thank you. another question we've had in. So this was about brand and price point. How do you raise the importance of brand in a low interest category where price is such a key factor? So where does brand sit alongside a price war essentially in a category? And how do you manage that? How important is brand? Dani?
Yeah.
Maria?
You start, yeah. Yeah, I think the first point is that could be the distinguishing factor. And a lot of the time when price particularly is a determining factor, it's the personality that's linked to that brand that can bring it through, because that's going to create the loyalty of why to go to them other than someone else. So in there, it's not just about how you're kind of marketing the product. It's about the life that's breathed into that product behind it. And actually, in some cases, maybe if it's a small startup or a smaller scale business, it's that personal story of the founder, I think, plays a really important part there as well. Because 9 times out of 10 at that stage in the journey, you are the brand identity to a certain extent. So it's making sure it's really lived through that leadership persona too.
And I think this one, Dani, is probably for you as well. Any advice on brand unification? So a business with departments that offer lots of different services.
Yes, one thing we always talk about a lot when we're working on brand strategies is what we call umbrella themes, which is exactly what it is. We recognize that inevitably nowadays businesses have different service lines, product offers that need to speak to different audiences, but without wanting to dilute your kind of overarching brand, there needs to be something that naturally kind of pulls that together. And then that kind of ties into, as Maria was talking about, it's like content pillars. So if we've got this umbrella campaign, how do we break that into your individual identities and create the content pillars that talk to each of those?
The next question very much aligns to that response, and I'll read it out. I've recently heard of a concept of a single brand having multiple brand identities, written, video, and audio. Do you have thoughts on how to develop a strategy that integrates all 3 into the overall brand strategy? Quite a big question.
It is, isn't it? No. I think it goes back to that same. I think there's got to be crossover between the 3, because otherwise you're just diluting it across too many touch points. I think there is absolutely value in having the different identities for different types of content to a certain extent, because the likelihood is you're using those types of content to get to a specific target audience, and that audience wants to hear something else. So as long as you're driven ultimately by that audience that sits at the bottom of the funnel, as it were, and then that's feeding through, then it's totally fine to tweak that messaging given the format or the kind of brand that you're succinctly talking about.
Maria?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would just add, it also depends, and obviously I don't know this question, but on the makeup of your business and the size and scale, and whether you have sub-brands. It's probably going to be much, much larger businesses, but you will often have the case where you've got kind of a parent brand and you have sub-brands, and it may be that they are product specific or service specific, and they might have a specific tone of voice or way of speaking about that particular area. But I think regardless, everything always needs to be integrated, and it always needs to end up talking to the overarching brand strategy or purpose and mission. And so that's the challenge, I guess. But I think that the most successful businesses, even when they're really complicated in terms of makeup, will always have a unifying message and purpose, and then everything else falls out of that. And that, drills down right into the kind of the formats as well, and the channels that you're using. Like Dani said, it can be, you can have different ways of speaking on those channels, but it all needs to be aligned, and you need to be really saying the same things, I think.
Brilliant. We've got time for a few more questions, so please do share any. We've got one more here. How should clients and agencies be working together to best amplify brand strategy? I think anyone could take that.
I think it starts when we were saying earlier about having those guidelines and frameworks and documents in place. If you're not all working across them, then it's not a unified approach. And usually, and like when we're onboarding a new client, actually, we tend to review what's already in place. And sometimes maybe we'll challenge that, or maybe we'll tweak it slightly depending on the channels that we're planning to use as part of our program. I mean, obviously our bread and butter notoriously has been media relations. That's very different sometimes than talking from what Maria would do on the content strategy point of view. So we've always got to be aware of ultimately what our goal is and what the program of kind of comms is that's coming out of it. But we need to make sure that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah. What role do influencers, we haven't talked much about them today, that's quite an interesting question. What role do influencers play in brand awareness and building trust online? Whether Joe or Maria, you wanted to touch on that?
Yeah, I can start. I think they play a huge role. I think the influencers, content creators, there's lots of changes at the moment. Think about platforms, think about TikTok, the way that way that content creators work changes all the time. But at the end of the day, they're brand advocates. And so there's kind of two ways you can think about it. Obviously, you could have a paid influencer strategy. That's brilliant. And that's definitely something to consider. But you need to make sure that you're working with people that genuinely have positive things to say about your brand, that it's authentic for them to talk about your brand and your service or product. Otherwise, it's not going to have the impact that you want, and it's going to feel forced, and they're going to know you've just paid for that, and they don't really believe in what it is that you do or that you sell. I think, organic kind of online influencers, so people just naturally talking about your brand and sharing it amongst their networks and on the platforms that they are, is fantastic. That's really what you want. You want to build that authentic kind of sharing amongst people, that they love your brand or your business so much they want to talk about it. Obviously, that's more difficult to curate in some ways, but I think it's just all about having this really clear strategy, really clear sense of who you are as a business, what you're putting out there into the world, and sharing really valuable information, content, things that people can engage with, so that they want to talk about and share what it is that you do as a business.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more. What advice would you get if there was a fundamental shift in client operations that required a potential rebrand? I think that probably leans back to some of the comments you were making earlier, Dani.
Yeah, I think it's going back to that process and that purpose bit. If that has shifted, then yes, inevitably things need to move out of it. I think depending on the scale of that shift, and if those audiences have completely changed, will obviously dictate how far you need to go with that rebrand process. There are going to be times when you just need to start again, and that's totally fine too. I think in those situations, the biggest thing to bear in mind is the legacy that you're leaving behind. Sometimes there is absolutely going to be value in taking part of that with you, and therefore a complete rebrand might not be right, because you're kind of underdoing all the hard work that's gone in before to get your business to the state it is now. But equally, there are times when there's a journey that you can take your audiences on with you to move to that shift. So it's very circumstantial, but it's just going back to that process and seeing where you get to.
And we know the importance of doing your sort of stakeholder audits and really understanding your stakeholders. Would you ever advise a client get your stakeholders involved in the brand process in terms of developing a brand? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it depends on different elements of when and how. You don't want decisions by committee, because it can just make things incredibly complicated. But if you involved in the first place through that research and insights, as Joe was talking about that process, interviews, one-on-one interviews, focus groups, not necessarily consulting them on the brand as per se, but how is it they connect to your organization? What's important about what you do? What makes you different? So you're almost using them to build out that insight that's going to inform that brand strategy, rather than asking them for kind of sign off on a new approach.
Yeah, definitely. We can teach AI to act like them, but getting the real opinions of them is always going to be better in ultimately developing that narrative that you go with.
Absolutely.
I was just gonna give an example of that. Actually, I used to work at Girl Guiding, and whilst I was there, we had a rebrand, and obviously it's a heritage brand. It's existed for over 100 years. The stakeholder element, so important, because there are many stakeholders. It's a hierarchical organization, and I think depending on your type of organization, whether you're, you know, B2B, not for profit, or whatever the makeup is of your business or organization, you've got to think about what's right for you. And I agree with Dani, like, you can't have decision by committee at the end of the day, but there are ways to involve people at the different stages so that everyone is going on that journey with you. And they're not surprised when you unveil something at the end and they have no idea why it looks like that, or you've got that tagline or that kind of, you know, rationale about who you are. So I think stakeholder management is really, really key, especially depending on the size of your business. You know, taking people on that journey is important.
Brilliant. And I think just the final minute, and then we're gonna wrap up. One tip from each of you. I think if we're, you know, we've probably got lots of people who don't have hundreds of thousands of pounds necessarily sitting there to develop a brand strategy and a communication plan. So what are some of the tips that you would advise focusing on from a kind of messaging reputational perspective, from the online perspective, and also the content perspective? Can we start with Dani?
Yeah. So I would say take time on the purpose. It forms the foundation. It sets the tone for everything that follows. But don't overly complicate it. It is what it is. Test those USPs, ensure they're differentiators, and then articulate them well and use those proof points. And then finally, it's got to be, as it comes up a lot during this webinar, review and renew. Don't stop at the first iteration. The world's constantly changing. So are you. So evolve and let it grow with you.
Thank you, Dani. Joe?
Information is key. You know, before you start on that exercise, you've really got to understand what your brand perception is now to be able to build on it. And from a digital reputation perspective as well, you need to see, you know, what the lay of the land is before you can start trying to mitigate any potential future risks. So do that work up front to really have a clear picture in your mind that you can then build on as you go through that brand strategy process.
Thanks, Joe. Maria?
Well, I don't want to say the similar thing, but it's true. I think insights, that upfront work. So from a content perspective, as I've said, knowing where people are, thinking about the channels, what they're engaging with. You know, you don't need lots of money to do that research and that insights. It can be desktop research, and it's going to really set you up for success, I think. And also just, don't leave the content aspect and how you're going to put your message out into the world to the last minute. It needs to be baked into everything you're doing from a strategy perspective at the beginning.
Brilliant. So thank you so much to Dani and Joe and Maria for sharing their insight and experience with us today. And thank you so much to everyone who has joined us. We will be sharing the content from this and the recording for anyone, obviously, who's been unable to attend. And obviously, if you'd like to talk about brands, communications, or anything we have discussed today in more detail, then please do get in touch. Thank you.